Good morning. I'm hoping that it's okay to make a Shades of Grey reference without getting into a little weirdness. It is kind of early in the morning for that. So I thought I would focus my talk on how we define predatory. What is a predatory journal? Are all low-quality journals predatory? And how do you tell the difference? And how do librarians and other people who work with the authors and readers of journals help them tell the difference? So the dictionary definition is sometimes, I think, overly broadly applied to journals that may be predatory, may have true intent to rob, victimize, or exploit others for gain. And sometimes it may not be so clear. Not all predatory journals are alike. So they exist along a continuum of really bad to not great. You'll notice that the arrow goes from red to not quite green. I didn't want to imply that the least bad option on this continuum was great. So it's kind of like, yellowish. So intent to defraud includes things like asking for a higher publication fee after the article is accepted, holding an accepted article hostage so that it can't be submitted elsewhere. Then you get into deceptive business practices, where journals that say they perform peer review when they actually don't, listing names on an editorial board of people who are not actively involved and may not have actually even been contacted for permission, lying about indexing or ISSN or impact factor. And then you get into implying the implication that the journal is higher quality than it actually is. So you'll see sometimes journals will say that they are the premier or leading journal in their field, or that they're widely accepted. And we'll look at some examples in a few minutes when the articles are actually really low quality. And then the least bad point on my spectrum that I have here is just providing cheap publication services with very little oversight or very little process. So basically accepting papers as they are written. And I think there is a debate about whether these journals take advantage of authors who couldn't be published elsewhere, or whether they're filling a necessary space in the spectrum of publishing. So let's say we're talking about ice cream instead of journals. Is this predatory ice cream, or is it low quality ice cream? In the worst case, an ice cream manufacturer, in the worst case on the spectrum, say we applied that spectrum to ice cream. So in the worst case, an ice cream manufacturer would be saying it contained ingredients that it did not, or it could be saying it's premium quality when it's not made from high quality ingredients, and the price may or may not reflect the actual ingredients that are in the ice cream. Or it could be more upfront about what you see is what you get. So this is obviously not great ice cream. The packaging doesn't include any of the indicators that we associate with high quality ice cream. The manufacturer is implying that their product is delicious, but that's really up to the consumer to decide. So they're not really making any false claims. One person might think it's delicious, one person might not. And they would probably argue that they're responding to an opportunity in the market for people who want to eat ice cream but don't have a lot of money to spend. But the difference between ice cream and journals is that there is a regulatory body, the FDA in the United States, that controls the claims that manufacturers can make about ice cream and other products. So they can't say it's vanilla ice cream in this case. You'll notice that they have to say it's artificially flavored vanilla ice cream. So there are very strict regulations, and the dairy lobby is involved in this, and as well as the regulatory body. But there's no such regulation of journal publishers on a national, or certainly not on an international level, although I know the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, did get involved in the past year in filing a complaint against a predatory publisher. But there's definitely not anything on an international scale. So all of this is to say that I think intent is important. Not all low-quality open access journals are necessarily predatory. And I tried to make this Venn diagram, and it's not to scale. Obviously, I think the proportions should not be taken literally. But just to suggest that there is, among a large group of open access journals, there are some that are low quality, sure, and of those, some of those could be considered truly predatory. Low-quality open access journals serve a particular purpose in scholarly publishing, and they can have completely honest intentions, but they can still have negative consequences for authors and readers, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. So, in recent years, Jeffrey Beall has made no secret of the fact that he considers open access publishing writ large to be anti-capitalist, anti-freedom of press, and so on. And sometimes publishers complained about finding themselves on his list, very famous blacklist that many people used, which was the closest thing that we had to a blacklist of predatory publishers. So we relied on this list for almost a decade, but it turned out that his definition of bad actor was too broad. And that's probably what was behind the sudden disappearance of Beall's list from the University of Colorado's website at the beginning of this year. And I'll say that Joe Esposito's blog post on his decision to part ways with Jeffrey Beall's philosophy, and definitely the comments of that post on the Scholarly Kitchen blog as well are definitely worth reading. And he also links to Beall's post where it was 2013, where he really kind of laid it all out there, what he really thought about open access as a space in publishing. So one of the things that I work on figuring out as a librarian and somebody who supports faculty and early career researchers is, why do authors choose to publish in predatory or low quality journals? So quicker time to publication, obviously. Institutional incentives might include bonuses and advancement. That's definitely true in some developing countries where publishing in an English language international journal is really a benchmark for success as an early career researcher. But their English language writing skills are not always good enough for their papers to be accepted in a higher quality, more selective journal. And this is where you get the situation of a low-quality journal that might be publishing fine quality research, but it's poorly expressed. So that becomes an issue for the reader as well. How do you determine whether something is just badly written or if it's bad research? And at institutions where faculty might be paid by the course, research and publishing are not income-generating activities. So they sometimes choose to publish in low-quality journals that don't require them to spend a lot of time writing. If they're not on a tenure track, there's no pressure to publish in higher quality journals. And I know it's very small there. There was a really good study that was published earlier this year in the Journal of Scholarly Publishing, the rewards of predatory publications at a small business school. I think this study is unique in that it focuses on a North American institution. We hear so much about this kind of publishing activity in developing countries in the global south, but this talks about, he did a qualitative study of faculty who publish at a small business school, fairly new school in British Columbia, so it's not a prestigious institution, it's not Harvard Business School. But asking them why, looking at how many of them published in journals that were on Beall's list, which he was able to access at that point, and then asking them why did they choose to publish, and that reason that research and publishing was not an income-generating activity for them was really high among them. So, a faculty member is going to get paid more if they can teach 5 classes a semester versus 4 classes a semester, and that extra time is not worth necessarily publishing if they're not at a tenure-granting institution. Early career researchers and grad students are a constituency that I work a lot with. They sometimes need more guidance on choosing a publication venue, and that varies by discipline. So in the sciences, obviously, they are often co-authoring with their lab supervisors or their advisors who already have very well-established publishing practices. But in the social sciences and humanities, that's not necessarily the custom. and in professional degree programs, they don't necessarily have that kind of institutional knowledge within their department. So the people that are their instructors and their advisors are often practitioners rather than researchers themselves. So I actually get a lot of questions from our education doctoral students, our EDD students, asking how they can figure out where they should publish their work. And I also get questions from students being contacted by predatory dissertation publishers also. So the people, there are a couple in particular who are notorious for emailing every student in ProQuest and saying, wonderful, we'd love to publish your dissertation, exactly as published, which is what every person who just finished their dissertation wants to hear, right? They don't want to think about turning it into a book, but I try to advise them that that is a really bad idea because that will affect, while having their dissertation available open access is not usually going to affect the market for a monograph that will eventually be developed from their book, having it actually published by a publisher may definitely impact their reputation as an early career researcher. And they may also have more difficulty parsing intent from email solicitations. So I developed a guide on our library website, what is a predatory publisher? So this is a tab on it. There's also more general advice about how to choose a publication venue, how to figure out if a journal is going to accept material in your discipline or in your subject area, but just some very basic information on how to figure out what might be a bad idea. And students are always encouraged to contact me for more information. So I wanted to take a couple of minutes to look quickly at some examples of solicitations from journals that I received. So I'm a librarian, not a scientist, not an engineer. These people just email everybody who has a .edu email address. So you can see I know it's probably hard to read the actual text, but if you were an early career researcher and you got some of these solicitations, it could be difficult to tell. How do you know, as a graduate student or a new person in the field, whether or not this journal is one of the well-known international engineering journals, for example, or if it's widely acceptable in major universities, or it has prestigious academic editors or reviewers. So if I'm getting these, I save these actually in my email because they're useful for illustration. So it was very interesting just looking through some of these. It took me quite a while to figure out, all right, does this actually have an ISSN? Is it indexed in any of these things that it says it's indexed in? Most researchers are not necessarily going to go to all of that trouble, and so that's problematic. I get this solicitation regularly, by the way. I just got this a couple of weeks ago, but I probably get it every 6 months at least. They are very, very persistent. And then this one, I figured out that this is actually, I think, an example of spoofing. So this is a journal that actually exists. It changed titles and was taken over by Taylor and Francis. It now has a different ISSN, different impact factor. The table of contents of its current issues on the Taylor and Francis website don't match the table of contents on this journal. So I think this is a very questionable journal. But again, that would be very difficult for a researcher or a reader to figure out. Readers are taught, students, undergraduates especially, they're taught to look for scholarly journals and what the signs of those are. It's not always easy, though, to parse whether what they're looking at is actually a genuine journal or not. And then one more. This is an example of, there are several journals that I get solicitations from. Journals based in India, they offer lower cost APCs for Indian authors in rupees. And then they're still low cost for other authors, $50. That's pretty low for an article processing charge. Their flagship title is indexed in the International Innovative Journal Impact Factor list. I don't know what that is. There's not much grandiose language, so thinking back to that continuum at the beginning, they're not claiming to be the best, most wonderful journal. The issues are small, mostly Indian authors. They're not all written in good English, and they appear to be published as they're submitted without editing. So this, I would say, is probably a low-quality journal that gives Indian authors in particular an opportunity to publish in an international journal in English with little review, and that helps them in their career. It's not necessarily going to help them gain an international reputation as a scholar, but for their purposes, for advancement in their institution, it serves a purpose. I want to just quickly finish by talking about the reader, which is not something that we think about a lot when we talk about predatory journals, right? So we're often thinking of the impact on the market or the impact on authors who are deceived. But I think readers can be deceived or disadvantaged by predatory journals and low-quality journals as well. So for a reader, it may be even more difficult to determine predatory versus poor quality. They don't necessarily, money's not changing hands, right? The content is open access. Their reputation is not going to be directly impacted by whether or not they read an article from one of these journals. So they probably have less incentive to figure out whether a journal that they find is legitimate or not. And as I mentioned at the beginning, it's difficult to tell whether poorly written articles contain good research. And even a well-written article will suffer by association with a journal that publishes bad writing or bad research. So just an example. So we know that our students are going to Google first. For, as much as we want them to come to our discovery systems, we know that they often start their research in Google. So this is an example of a journal article found in Google. It looks okay so far, it's got all the trappings of a scholarly journal article. Here is the introduction, and I'll just give you one moment to determine that it is not intelligible at all. And then I will show you that this article is number 4 in the Google search results for impact of SMS on writing skills. And, so this is truly something that is impacting our library users, because if they're using Google for doing their research, they are getting to articles like this very easily. And so our role as librarians is not just about, come on, you guys got to use the discovery system because we paid a lot of money for all of these resources. There really is kind of a moral imperative here as well to make sure that if they are using Google, we really need to insert ourselves in that process and teach them better how to evaluate information resources. It can't just be about scholarly journals versus websites. They're all the same sometimes. And so, you can see that the Journal of Anthropology and Archaeology listed underneath there has a DOI. That's number 5. But, if you're an undergraduate student and it's 3 in the morning and your paper is due the next day, you're just going to go, to the first couple of articles you find and hope that that's good enough for your bibliography. And, they're not necessarily getting good quality research. So, it is definitely, I think, important for us to educate our readers, our users, about predatory and low quality journals as well as our authors. So with that, I will say thank you.